If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Columbine series. This has been a long-awaited, much-requested podcast into the deep dive of the Columbine High School massacre. What unfolded, what happened before it unfolded, why it unfolded, the aftermath, and why so much is still unknown and shrouded in mystery regarding the Columbine incident. And we're going to be dispelling a lot of myths that for some reason still perpetuate to this day regarding the Columbine killers. We'll also be diving into some conspiracy theories, multiple shooters, SWAT team fire, as well as a slew of other issues, including CIA connections from those involved, and Columbine itself, as well as Littleton and the surrounding area. And unlike other podcasts, I am going to start with the most mind-shocking content right off the bat. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, find it interesting, you donate to our PayPal, just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through, or you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock. You can like and share this podcast, share on social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So, yes, I am going to start off right off the bat with the mind shocks. I will be doing a brief overview of the entire incident for those who haven't heard of Columbine, even though it is technically the most infamous school shooting incident probably in world history, but definitely in American history. Columbine is just even referred to as Columbine. It doesn't even get the entire descriptive treatment as other events. You just say the word Columbine, everybody automatically knows what you're talking about in the U.S. So, first of all, was this the only Columbine massacre? No, it was not. Here's a mind shock for everybody. There was yet another Columbine massacre in 1927. So this was the November 21st massacre of 1927. And this was 72 years before the famous April 21st, 1999 massacre. And this massacre was carried out by Colorado state troopers and militia against miners who were on strike at the Columbine mine in coincidentally named Serene, Colorado. So this is from ColoradoEncyclopedia.org, the Columbine Mine Massacre. On November 21st, 1927, members of a Colorado militia fired into a crowd of hundreds of striking miners in Weld County, the town of Serene, killing 6 and wounding 20. The Columbine Massacre showed that little had changed in Colorado in terms of relations between workers and companies, as well as between labor and the state in the 13 years since the Ludlow Massacre, the deadliest labor conflict in state history. And the Ludlow Massacre was 13 years prior to that, and that was on April 20th, 1914. So, interesting dates here. We have almost to the exact day, within hours of the exact day of the April 21st massacre, 1999, there is a massacre April 20th, 1914, and yet another massacre, November 22nd, 1927. Now, before we get to the Ludlow Massacre, let me finish with the Columbine Massacre of 1927. The disputed events Coal mining in Colorado. Mining in Colorado is often associated with precious metals such as gold and silver, but by the late 19th century, coal had become the state's most important commodity. It underwrote the entire industrial economy, from gold mining and smelting to construction and railroads. Coal also heated hundreds of homes in cities such as Denver. Unlike coal operations in the eastern U.S., coal mining in Colorado was dominated by only a handful of large companies, with the two most prominent being Colorado Fuel and Iron and the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company. Working in coal mines was dirty and dangerous. Even in the 1920s, after decades of labor activism had resulted in some gains for workers, coal miners still worked up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They inhaled coal dust all day long, which led to the devastating respiratory disease known as black lung. Mine shafts could collapse or flood. Rock slides and fires were also common. Flammable methane gas released from coal beds often built up in the mines, and each morning an inspector had to check the air quality before work could begin. If this was not done properly, explosions would occur, such as when the Jokerville mine exploded near Crested Butte in 1884, or when the Vulcan mine in Garfield County blew up 3 times between 1896 and 1918. Rise of the Colorado Wobblies. Given the slew of accidents, injuries, and deaths at the state's coal mines, it is no wonder that many miners turned to unions to advocate for better working conditions in the early 20th century. At Ludlow, in 1914, workers were represented by the United Mine Workers of America. The UMWA largely withdrew from Colorado by the 20s after its lack of success in the previous decade. In its place became a more radical union, the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, whose members were known as Wobblies and explicitly embraced communism. This position made the union a major target of local newspapers and state officials during the late 1910s and 20s, when anti-communist sentiment ran rampant across the country. In 1919, for instance, famous IWW leader William Big Bill Haywood was jailed along with several other union leaders. These actions, however, only resulted in other members stepping into the leadership void. The strike of 1927. In 1927, the catalyst for union activity in Colorado actually came from far beyond the state's borders. On August 23rd, 2 Italian immigrants and anarchists, Niccolo Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetta, were wrongfully executed for murder in Massachusetts. In response, the IWW, made up of immigrant workers from dozens of nations, urged coal miners in Colorado to go on strike in solidarity with Sacco and Vanzetti. Some 10,000 responded in a day-long walkout, indicating that conditions were ripe for further union activity in the state. Mine workers and state officials retaliated by firing some of the Solidarity strikers and closing common meeting grounds for miners, such as pool halls. Despite those measures, in early September, IWW leaders met in Aguilar in southern Colorado to finalize demands for a strike. They wanted wages up from about $6 to $7.50 per day, employment of union check weighmen who verified each miner's tonnage, which figured into how much they were paid, and the recognition of pit committees, groups of employer and worker representatives who dealt with labor problems at mines. The strike officially got underway in October, with some 8,400 workers leaving mines across the state. Governor William H. Billy Adams refused to recognize the IWW and declared the strike illegal. Conflict at the Columbine mine. While the bulk of the state's coal industry was crippled by the walkouts, the Columbine mine near Lafayette was able to remain in operation by hiring 150 strikebreakers. Opened by the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company in 1919, the Columbine had quickly become one of the largest and most productive coal mines in the state, employing hundreds and leading Colorado in tonnage by 1923. Such production came at a price, however. By 1927, workers had experienced dozens of accidents there, many of them fatal. And we'll get into other theories that actually believe that the Columbine area is actually cursed, it's some kind of vortex for evil activity, etc. And that's without even considering the 1999 school shooting. That's without that in the equation. There are people that believe that. During the strike, conditions at the Columbine quickly drew tense. To protect the strikebreakers and keep out union agitators, armed company guards converted the Columbine mine town of Serene into an armed camp, complete with barbed wire fencing and gates. Meanwhile, to recruit more workers to its cause, the IWW sent out carloads of singing agitators from Lafayette who made the rounds of the state's coalfields, belting out the union's anthem, Solidarity Forever. On the morning of November 14th, the quiet of Serene was broken by a demonstration of, according to the Longmont Daily Times, 400 striking miners led by their wives who waved flags and sang patriotic airs. They then piled into 50 cars and drove around the coalfields of Boulder County in a show of solidarity. With no end to the strike in sight and a diminishing coal supply as winter approached, the Longmont Daily Times gravely noted that the situation is getting serious, to say the least. Massacre. The disputed events of the next week would prove the Daily Times tragically correct. On the morning of November 21st, a crowd of about 500 striking miners and their wives marched to the gates of Serene, intending to go onto the Columbine mine to prevent strikebreakers from working. They were met by armed mine guards and, at mine owners' request, members of the Colorado Rangers, also known then as the Colorado State Police, a volunteer law enforcement group modeled after the Texas Rangers and ordered to Serene by Governor Adams. When Colorado Rangers leader Louis Scherf ordered the crowd to halt, IWW leader Adam Bell went to the gate and asked it to be unlocked. Instead, he was taunted and struck with a club, and a 16-year-old boy next to him had an American flag ripped out of his hand. The strikers surged forward, with some climbing over the gate, and Rangers launched tear gas canisters into the crowd, striking one woman in the back. A bloody brawl ensued, with strikers wielding rocks, fists, and knives, and Rangers swinging clubs and firing tear gas. The state police then fell back and opened fire on the crowd, which had intentionally left its firearms behind. Miners claimed a mounted machine gun also created a crossfire. 2 men were killed instantly, while 4 more later died of their wounds, and some 20 additional men and women were injured. Several guards and state policemen were also hurt. The slain miners were John Easteniz, Nick Spanudakis, Renee Jacques, Frank Kovich, Mike Vidovich, and Jerry Davis. The last names reflect the varied nationalities and backgrounds of the miners, all of whom pledged solidarity to one another under an American flag that was now, as one 1989 account of the massacre put it, riddled with bullets and stained with blood. Aftermath. The massacre prompted Governor Adams to organize the National Guard in preparation for a statewide battle, similar to the aftermath of Ludlow. However, the Guard never left Denver. Somewhat surprisingly, there were no reprisal attacks in the northern or southern coalfields, suggesting strikers had tired of violence. Thereafter, the strike lost momentum as workers and other unions distanced themselves from the IWW and resumed negotiations with the state's industrial board. The board had refused to recognize the IWW, but otherwise recognized miners' right to petition. After several more outbursts of violence between the state police and the IWW strikers across Colorado's southern coalfields, the strike finally ended in May 1928. New Rocky Mountain fuel owner Josephine Roche was a prominent union sympathizer, and she instituted a $7 wage and recognized the UMWA as the company's official union. Legacy. The strike that led to the Columbine Massacre shows that coal miners' working conditions had changed little despite decades of organizing, while the massacre itself indicated the state officials' contempt for organized labor had not dissipated in the roughly 14 years since Ludlow. The events of 1927 to 1928 were in many ways a reprise of Ludlow, except without much retaliatory aggression by miners. Still, no rangers or mine guards were held responsible for their actions on November 21st. The massacre also sounded the death knell for the IWW in Colorado, as workers came to realize that the union did not have the political sway to get them what they needed. Left out of most Colorado history books, the Columbine Mine Massacre nonetheless remains one of the most tragic events in the state's long and brutal struggle between workers and their corporate exploiters. And you can tell there's no political bias here on coloradoencyclopedia.org. Now, the Ludlow Massacre, this was April 20th, 1914. The Ludlow massacre began on the morning of April 20th, 1914, when a battle broke out between the Colorado National Guard and striking coal miners at their tent colony outside of Ludlow in Las Animas County. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, but the incident is remembered as a massacre because the miners and their families bore the brunt of the casualties. At least 19 people died, including one guardsman, 5 miners, and 13 women and children who suffocated as they hid from the gunfire in a pit. More died in violence throughout southern Colorado over the next few days. No matter how the casualties are counted, the Ludlow massacre is one of the bloodiest events in American labor history. The massacre was the culminating event of the 1913 to 1914 Colorado coal miners' strike. The strike had 2 main goals: getting coal operators to follow state of Colorado mining law and gaining representation by the United Mine Workers of America for Colorado's coal miners. The dispute was bloody from the outset, with deaths on both sides. The state's largest private employer, the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, employed most of the striking miners. Since it had more resources than the miners, its effort to intimidate union members into ending the dispute resonated most in the public mind. For example, October 17, 1913, an armor-plated car, quickly dubbed the Death Special, shot up the miners' tent colony at Forbes, killing one and scaring many. As a result of such tactics, every miner's tent colony was heavily armed. In response to that, Colorado Governor Elias M. Ammons deployed the National Guard to keep the miners under control. Wow, that is really, really crazy. The Guard was supposed to maintain the peace, but since miners had already worked out a deal with the state to pay for the cost of deployment, the troops actually caused more trouble. The battalion also included many veterans of the Spanish-American War and the Philippine insurrection, who were conditioned to think of the multi-ethnic miners as their inferiors. No matter which side fired first on April 20th, the battle began as a result of mutual distrust and fear. With a history of violence on both sides, any minor incident could have blown up to be a major conflict. Once that conflict started, most of the residents of the Ludlow colony evacuated. Thinking the colony had been abandoned, guardsmen burned the tents to the ground. Nobody knew about those 13 women and children and the pit until their bodies were found the next morning, suffocated by the fumes rather than shot down in cold blood, as the miners alleged. However, an accurate indicator of the Guard's unbridled hostility towards the miners was the cold-blooded execution of 3 leaders under a flag of truce. Louis Tikas, a Greek-American leader of the striking miners, was shot 3 times in the back. Ramifications from the massacre began instantly. When other miners heard of the events at Ludlow, they went on a killing spree across the region. Mine supervisors and guards were shot, mine property was destroyed, innocent people were killed on both sides. It is impossible to determine how many people died in the days after the massacre, although it was certainly more than the number of the people who died in the initial tragedy. Rumors of a slaughter by the National Guard run rampant, fueled by the outside world's inability to confirm what happened. On April 28th, President Woodrow Wilson dispatched the U.S. Army to Colorado, thereby ending the violence and restoring order to the region. So clearly this is really, really bizarre regarding the activity that took place. I mean, these are dark times, massacres, reprisals, people going around killing innocents on both sides. I mean, this is really, really dark stuff. And it's about to get into a Rockefeller Illuminati territory now. The 1913 to 1914 Colorado coal strike ended in December 1914, with the Union achieving none of its stated objectives. Nevertheless, the deaths of the women and children in the death pit captured the public imagination. In an era that can be described as Victorian in outlook, killing unarmed women and children, even if done by accident, was completely unacceptable to the American public. Therefore, despite the hostile press that striking miners had received before the massacre, media outlets attacked the mine owners with gusto afterwards. It was Denver's Rocky Mountain News, rather than the miners, that coined the term Ludlow Massacre shortly after the event. A clever media campaign by the UMWA that included a nationwide speaking tour by female survivors of the massacre won further support for the Union cause. An investigation of the strike and subsequent massacre by the U.S. Commission on Industrial Relations under Chairman Frank Walsh kept the tragedy in the news for years after it happened. The primary object of Union and public hostility after the Ludlow massacre was John D. Rockefeller Jr., the oil baron's son and primary stockholder of CF&I. Shortly after the tragedy, the writer Upton Sinclair and others protested outside Rockefeller's New York City office. Sinclair was also part of a mock trial of Rockefeller for murder near the industrialist's hometown in upstate New York. As a result, Rockefeller hired the future Prime Minister of Canada, then a former Labor Minister, W.L. Mackenzie King, to design the so-called Rockefeller Plan, an employer representation plan or company union to critics that was designed to give miners just enough rights and privileges in order to avoid future tragedies. In 1918, the UMWA erected a statute commemorating the Ludlow massacre on the site of the tent colony. The Union continues to commemorate the event each year to this day. And of course, Upton Sinclair is someone who I quote very often. He is the author of the quote, "It is very difficult to get a man to understand something which his salary depends on him not understanding," which is, of course, very prevalent in the field of scientism, the dominant religion of the world. So, there's a lot of massacres going on in Colorado, and it gets stranger and stranger because even Dylan Klebold, one of the shooters, supposedly the mountains of west of Littleton is where Lockheed Martin had a defense contractor facility. And that is, I think, yeah, that was even in the Bowling for Columbine documentary. It's just a lot of coincidences, and there's actually plenty more. Dylan Klebold's birthday is none other than September 11th, and for those that say that's a coincidence, yeah, so it's 1 out of a 365 chance that his birthday would be on that day, but that's narrow. I mean, once you start stacking the combinations, for example, Eric Harris's father, Air Force officer with supposed connections to the CIA and clandestine operations. So Eric Harris used to live at Plattsburgh Air Force Base in New York State with his father. Allegedly, and again, I am not claiming this is true or untrue, supposedly at the age of 10, Eric Harris had complained to his friends that he was being drugged at the base. And it's rumored that there's a gigantic underground facility under the base with some kind of connections to MK Ultra programs. And I won't go too far down those rabbit holes right now because we have a lot to go through. But these are 2 massacres here in the general area in Colorado. One of them on approximately the same exact date within hours. It's just, I don't know. There's a lot of coincidences here. Some people allege that all of this strange behavior in Colorado it's because of some kind of hypoxia because of the altitude. Not that it affects everybody, but it affects people who already have some kind of mental illness, and it makes them go even more insane, and that's without getting into any kind of MK Ultra or any kind of drugs that individuals were on. Actually, I'll go with one more mind shock here. There's a redacted individual who was part of one of this... Actually, I'll get to it in a minute. This is probably the most mind-shocking thing about the entire incident, but let me preface it with death education. So, this expose on death education, classes about death in schools and high schools, Columbine High School in Colorado was actually one of the first high schools to implement death education. This is a report from 1990, 9 years prior, on 2020. Not exactly an obscure program. Columbine specifically is featured here. Let's take a look.
Aren't kids seeing more of death younger these days on television and with crack and violence in the streets? Isn't there a need to educate them younger about death?
It sounds like one of those things, Tom, that would be a good idea, except empirically it's just not working out that way. See, these interventions aren't powerful enough. They're not therapeutic enough, if you will, to keep the troubled kids out of trouble, but they are powerful enough to draw the untroubled kids into becoming troubled.
I didn't see any reason to keep going. If I didn't have any friends, I didn't have anything to live for, I basically just stopped caring.
Tara Becca believes she was seduced into a suicide attempt by her death ed class. 6 years ago, Tara was a junior at Columbine High in Littleton, Colorado. Her English literature teacher began weaving her own beliefs on reincarnation into the classroom discussions of death.
This is what this teacher was teaching. When you die, you get all the knowledge that God has, and then you're recreated. You come back again in another life form, and you have all the knowledge that God knows. And for a person like me that definitely loved to learn, that was exciting. You know, wow, I get to learn everything God knows.
Was death taught to you here as being something terrible, something to dread?
Oh, no. No, it was exciting. It was something to look forward to. It was definitely very appealing. It was an escape.
Tara finally decided she wanted to escape and saw death as the only solution to her typical teenage problems. She recreated her actions of that night for us, just as she had carefully planned her own suicide.
We talked about what we wanted to look like in our casket. That night I went and I had my hair fixed up and I had my nails done.
Then she searched the nearby Rockies for a suitable cliff to drive over. She sat in her car for hours contemplating the life or death decision.
I wanted freedom from my body, and this was the only way I could get free from myself. I would no longer be in bondage, and this is what the teacher and everybody in the class was talking about. So I decided that I was going to make everything look like an accident.
After carefully planning her own suicide, Tara drove home for one last visit.
I came home late that night after thinking it all over, and my dad met me at the front door, and they could see that I was definitely not with it. I was saying things like, "It's not really me." And my mom and dad knew that there was something desperately wrong, so they took me to the hospital and put me in a psychological area of counseling so that I could get some help.
Tara's English teacher is no longer at Columbine High. The school has refused to comment on the case, other than to say the course had nothing to do with Tara's problems.
You were, as a teenager, confused, you were depressed, you felt lonely. I mean, without this class, might you not have been a candidate for suicide?
I had thought about it as a possible option for a lot of years, but I never would have gone through with it. Never, because I wasn't brave enough. The things that we learned in the class taught us how to be brave enough to face death.
What makes us think that American education is going to do a good job teaching death education? We ought to be trembling about the fact that the schools, which have failed to teach academics, are now presuming to teach matters of life and death.
Yes, some elements of this teaching just do seem overly morbid, touching cadavers and everything.
We should point out that the use of actual bodies in these classes is reasonably limited, but we had no trouble finding this course.
Do parents know that this is being taught in each case?
That's a major problem, Hugh, that schools teaching these courses without letting the parents at home know, and the answer is for the parents either individually or collectively as a group, if they're concerned about this, to go to their school to find out if death ed is being taught, and then find out what's in the curriculum, because that's important. Also, is it an option for the kids, or are they being pushed into this by peer pressure? Parents know whether the kids are emotionally ready for it.
You know, in sex education, a lot of experts feel that questions should be honestly answered, but that to load a lot of information that's unasked on little kids is
On
probably...
a young mind, it is
Might not be a
a
good
heavy
idea.
burden to get into that type of subject, including death.
Right. Thank you, Tom.
Certainly.
So, disturbing testimony from Tara Becker. And so this was 6 years prior, so we're looking at the 1984 time frame, where Columbine High School teachers were telling students that death was something to look forward to, that you would gain all of the knowledge of God upon death, and there'd be reincarnation, and she became suicidal. I mean, this is disturbing information. And it was featured specifically on 2020 regarding Columbine High School. And I'm going to read another article here, What Caused Columbine. This is from the Phyllis Schlafly Report, Volume 32, Number 11. It was published in June 1999, so shortly after. Everybody's looking for the causes of the terrible tragedy at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and for ways to prevent such horrible happenings in the future. Hillary Clinton has volunteered her intuition that part of growing up is learning how to control one's impulses. Putting aside the point that most of us don't have impulses to go on a killing rampage, who is going to teach kids to control their impulses? Certainly not the village, i.e. the government or government schools, which Mrs. Clinton believes should have prime responsibility for raising children. For the past 25 years, the prevailing dogma in public school teaching has been values clarification, as in the tremendously influential 1972 book of the same name by Sidney Simon. That means teaching students to reject the old moral and ethical standards and instead make their own choices and build their own value system. Indeed, Eric Harris and his sidekick Dylan Klebold did build their own value system, which allowed them to kill 13 people at Columbine, then take their own lives. Harris and Klebold were not dumb or underprivileged. They came from affluent two-parent families. Professionals who evaluated them concluded that Harris was, quote, a very bright young man who was likely to succeed in life, end quote, and that Klebold was, quote, intelligent enough to make any dream a reality, end quote, New York Times, April 23rd, 1999. Values clarifications teaches that since there are absolutely no absolutes, students should engage in personal decision-making about behavior instead of looking to God, the Ten Commandments, parents, church, or any other authority which teaches that behavior should conform to traditional morality. Values Clarifications is a book of 79 dilemmas for the teacher to present to the students. The most frequently used classroom dilemma is the lifeboat game, and its numerous variations such as the fallout shelter. The student is told that there are 10 people in a sinking lifeboat and 4 must be thrown out to drown so that the other 6 may live. The student is vested with the authority to decide who lives and who dies. Shall it be the famous author, the pregnant woman, the rabbi, the Hollywood dancer, or the policeman? Any answer is acceptable. Whatever each student feels comfortable with is okay, and the students can all choose different drowning targets because there are no right or wrong answers. No wrong answers, that is, except one. One mother told our Eagle Forum Parents Advisory Center that her child answered the question by saying, Jesus brought another boat and nobody had to drown. That child got an F for giving an unacceptable answer. The worldview of Cassie Bernal, who looked into the barrel of a gun and said, yes, I believe in God, is not acceptable within the rubric of values clarification. She was killed by a fellow student who had built his own value system. As in the lifeboat game, Harris and Klebold had already decided that it was their right to decide who would live and who would die. Harris posted on the internet, quote, my belief is that if I say something, it goes. I am the law, and if you don't like it, you die. Feel no remorse, no sense of shame, end quote. Washington Post, April 29, 1999. As part of a government and economics class at Columbine, Harris and Klebold made a video in which they showed themselves as hitmen hired out to do violence to athletes. The video was violent and ended with the two bludgeoning the head of a dummy amid much fake blood. It amounted to a practice run for the Columbine shooting. The teacher of that class has refused to talk to reporters about the tape. Washington Post, April 29, 1999. Another student-made video ends with 4 students walking away from Columbine High School, which explodes in a scene of orange special effects flashings. Denver Rocky Mountain News, May 6, 1999. When a surviving student was asked if anybody noticed anything odd about those student-made videos, she replied that, quote, Everybody's video involved fighting, end quote. She noted that many of the videos were violent and that her own contained sexual scenes. In creative writing class, Harris wrote his will as one of his assignments. Harris's and Klebold's writing were filled with gore and profanity. According to another student, they wrote about rocket launchers, grenades, zombies killing people, ripping people's flesh. Harris and Klebold spent many hours and hours playing death matches with violent video games. Associated Press, April 22nd, 1999. Harris was thrilled when Bill Clinton started bombing Yugoslavia. A classmate who sat next to him remembered Harris saying, quote, "I hope we do go to war. I want shoot everyone," end quote. Harris tried to enlist, but Marine recruiters turned him down when they discovered he had taken a powerful antidepressant drug called Luvox. Washington Post, April 29, 1999. And the Luvox scandal and all the things associated with all of these antidepressant drugs that seem to be involved in every single mass shooting. I won't be going down that rabbit hole in this podcast, but there's so much other information to go over here. Modern public school teaching exalts tolerance of other people's behavior as the highest virtue and self-esteem as education's principal objective. Harris and Klebold made a practice of annoying their teachers by propping their feet on their desks and leaning back in their chairs. In the modern classroom, we are forbidden to be judgmental about the behavior of others when they indulge their impulses instead of controlling them. This article's kind of all over the place. Obviously, there's plenty of peaceful slackers who also sit like that. Death education at Columbine. In 1987, Eagle Forum of Colorado produced a 2-hour video in which student Tara Becker spoke at length about the relentless focus on death, dying, and suicide in her junior class at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. She and several of her classmates attempted suicide as a result of this depressing curriculum, and it took them many months to recover from the experience. Tara was subsequently interviewed for the ABC TV 2020 program, aired September 21st, 1990, where she said, "I had thought about suicide as a possible option for a lot of years, but I never would have gone through with it because I was never brave enough. The things that we learned in that class taught us how to be brave enough to face death." She added, "We talked about what we wanted to look like in our caskets." I mean, this is gruesome. The 2020 segment showed morbid visuals of students' visits to cemeteries, embalming labs, where they were encouraged to touch still warm human remains, and to crematoriums where they were told about picking bones out of the ashes. ABC stated that 1 out of 10 schools teaches death education, that there is no approved curriculum, and that the teacher's training often consists only of a 1-day workshop. It was clear that ABC's Hugh Downs and Tom Jariel thought that the death education was bizarre. Jariel concluded the segment by asking if these courses suggest death as an answer to adolescent problems. "We urge ABC to re-air that important segment because of its relevance today. Obviously, ABC refuses to release a tape of this program to Matt Drudge." In 1988, Atlantic Monthly published an investigative article, Mortal Fears. This was February 1988, confirming that death and dying courses are given in thousands of schools, often sneaked into health, social studies, literature, or home economics courses without parents' knowledge. Atlantic described how these courses require students to visit cemeteries, funeral homes, write their own epitaphs to be put on tombstones made out of construction paper, write obituaries, wills, or suicide notes, decide how they would prefer to die, and plan their own funerals, body disposals, and pallbearers. Atlantic quoted from professional journals to demonstrate the widespread support for death education among educators. It quoted the school counselor as saying, in 1977, death education will play as important a part in changing attitudes toward death as sex education played in changing attitudes toward sex information and wider acceptance of various sexual practices. Atlantic also quoted a National Education Association report entitled Education for the 70s, which stated schools will become clinics whose purpose is to provide individualized psychosocial treatment for the student, and teachers must become psychosocial therapists. Most parents are unaware that the mission of the public schools has dramatically changed in the last 20 years by downgrading basic academics and instead using teachers as pseudo-psychologists conducting group therapy. This change was best described by the late U.S. Senator and former university president Sam Hayakawa, who, in successfully persuading Congress to pass the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment in 1978, said that the public schools have adopted an educational heresy that rejects the idea of education as the acquisition of knowledge and skills and regards the fundamental task in education as therapy. This invasion of the public school classroom by pseudo-psychologists conducting group therapy opened the floodgates to all sorts of psychological courses and surveys in sexuality, drugs, incest, death, suicide, stress, and self-esteem. Some of these courses incorporate guided imagery or New Age or occult practices. Readers used in elementary schools are often filled with weird or violent images, and little children are often taught to take their problems to Pumsy the dragon or Duso the dolphin. Surely one of the weirdest of these psychological courses is death education. According to the Atlantic Monthly article, parents in Illinois, Missouri, Michigan, and Florida have attributed their sons' suicides to public school courses in death, dying, or suicide. Littleton, Colorado is an area where public schools for many years have adopted all the trendy edufads, such as outcome-based education, OBE, is a dumbing down process that is heavy on the use of attitudinal and subjective materials and tests rather than, in Hakayawa's words, the acquisition of knowledge and skills. In 1993, at the high school in the district adjacent to Columbine, parents rebelled against this dumbing down process and, by a 2-to-1 vote, elected a back-to-basics school board. The teachers' union struck back in the following election and retook control. The union was supported by People for the American Way, using the usual negative slurs to accuse those opposed to OBE of being fundamentalists and part of the religious right. Some politicians, unfortunately, are using the Columbine tragedy to push their liberal political agenda, such as gun control. That's obviously not the answer, since killers Harris and Klebold violated at least 17 current federal and state gun control laws that, had they lived, would have kept them locked up for the rest of their lives. Does anybody think that Harris and Klebold would not have known how to release a mandatory gun lock, or would have been deterred by a 3-day waiting period, since Harris's own journal detailed year-long plans for the killing? The tragedies at Columbine, as well as Washington, Mississippi, Kentucky, Arkansas, Oregon, and Georgia, demand that we investigate the curriculum taught in these public schools, that the value system that is taught, and the powerful legal drugs that the children are taking. We are paying a terrible price for allowing public school curricula to teach students to create their own value system instead of respecting moral laws such as thou shalt not kill. So, interesting write-up regarding death education. Here's one more article from June 28, 1999. Culture of death caused Littleton massacre. Formerly suicidal student. Apparently there were many suicidal students here. Former Columbine student says classes caused her suicide attempt. Columbine killers were steeped in death awareness education. Columbine High School graduate Tara Merrill, who now lives near Nashville, Tennessee, attempted suicide in 1985 while attending the Littleton, Colorado high school that taught death awareness as part of its curriculum. Several of her friends also attempted suicide. The possible link between suicide, death, and the Columbine High School curriculum even got the attention of ABC's 2020. In a 1991 interview, Tara told 2020's Tom Jeriel that she was taught at school that death was something to look forward to. I had thought about suicide as a possible option for a lot of years, Tara said during the nationally broadcast interview, but I would have never gone through with it, never, because I wasn't brave enough. The things we learned in the class taught us how to be brave enough to face death. The woman who initially encouraged Tara to go public with her story, Colorado Eagle Forum director Jane Schindler, told conservativenews.com yesterday that Tara believes in a connection between the curriculum and the Columbine massacre. Tara wasn't surprised by the shooting at Columbine, said Ms. Schindler. She said the only difference between her suicide attempt and theirs is that they took victims with them. Ms. Schindler says Columbine's school system, Jefferson County, has one of the highest suicide rates in the nation. She also says Columbine remains a cutting-edge school for liberal social engineering and progressive programs like Goals 2000. Every educational fad came through there first, she said. Columbine had the best. Major media outlets have barely mentioned the death education factor. The Associated Press did mention on April 22nd that Eric Harris wrote out his will for an assignment in his creative writing class, and the April 29th Washington Post said part of Harris's and Klebold's government and economies class included the two making a video where they acted as hitmen and bludgeoned the head of a dummy amid much fake blood. But Tara Merrill says death awareness education was quite prominent at Columbine. It was integrated into many of the courses at the school. After one fellow student committed suicide, they had a suicide talking day in every class. She says students were instructed to write their own obituaries and suicide notes. This is dark. She told Miss Schindler that death was made to look more glamorous than living, that reincarnation would solve their problems, and that she would be doing the planet a favor by removing herself. I imagine the two killers felt they were doing the world a favor by taking these people out with them, Miss Schindler told conservativenews.com. The 2020 segment on Tara and Columbine showed morbid visuals of students visiting cemeteries and bombing labs where they were encouraged to touch corpses, and to crematoriums where they were told about picking bones out of the ashes. According to the Atlantic Monthly, first graders in one Florida school were taught to make model coffins from shoeboxes. Elsewhere, students were asked to sit in coffins as a way to confront the fear of death. A 10th grade lesson plan from Charlotte, North Carolina tells students to write their epitaphs on construction paper cut into the shape of a tombstone and to plan their own funeral. Try to include all the details and wishes, no matter how bizarre, the curriculum states. 2020 reported that 1 in 10 high schools in the nation teaches death awareness. Atlantic Monthly stated in 1988 that thousands of schools are involved. They quote the president of the Association for Death Education and Counseling, professor of psychology Judith Stillion of Western Carolina University. The increase in youth suicide is heightening awareness of the need for education in death and dying. But is this a chicken or the egg situation? The magazine The School Counselor argued in 1977 that death education will play as important a part in changing attitudes towards death as sex education. Okay. The National Education Association does not necessarily condemn death education, and when asked by this news service, would not comment specifically on any relationship to the curriculum and the Columbine massacre. We don't have a position praising or condemning it, said Kathleen Lyons, the NEA's manager of news media services. Columbine High School in Jefferson County school system could not be reached. Columbine High told 2020 and 1991 that Tara's English class discussing death and reincarnation had nothing to do with Tara's problems. Interesting. Ego Forum President Phyllis Schlafly, former head of Stop ERA, is calling on the major media to cover the death education aspect of the massacre. She wants ABC to rebroadcast their 1991-2020 episode. She says ABC refused to release the video of the show to Star Internet reporter Matt Drudge. I think the curriculum is the number one factor in our culture today, Miss Schlafly told conservativenews.com. The media doesn't want to face up to it. The public education apparatus is too big and powerful, and no one wants to take it on. So, very, very interesting and curious comments regarding death education. Also, Mark Taylor's mother apparently stated this as well, that she believed that classes like these aided in the massacre. So, yeah, apparently there were a lot of suicides, and including one of the primary investigators, his son committed suicide. I mean, there's just... yeah, it's pretty gruesome and dark. Apparently, a lot of the SWAT members either committed suicide or died as a result of drug issues. Obviously, some of them felt guilty for just standing around the school, and it goes even deeper. There's a lot more in the conspiratorial realm than people even talk about. We're not even talking about multiple shooters. I mean, obviously that's one of the biggest conspiracies. There's conspiracies that SWAT actually shot students, or one particular student. His parents actually filed a lawsuit. And there's just so much. But before I get into that, I just want to address the common misconceptions. And the main one is that this was never planned as an actual shooting. So they planted bombs in the school. And the bombs, had they detonated, they would have killed, supposedly, according to Wikipedia, 488 students in the cafeteria at the time would have been killed or severely injured. And then supposedly they wanted to sit outside in the parking lot and pick off other students. But there was never a planned inside the school shooting. A lot of people don't know that. Other misconceptions, of course, is that Dylan and Eric, they were not these outsiders with no friends and these loners that were just relentlessly bullied. I mean, obviously there's evidence that Eric Harris was bullied due to his size. Dylan Klebold, 6'4". I mean, he specifically even stated to his parents that he was never bullied, but he felt bad for kids that were. And they themselves bullied other kids. They had a big group of friends, including girls. I mean, people point to, oh, these guys couldn't get girls. Dylan had close friends that were girls, one of which actually purchased firearms for him. Eric had girlfriends. I mean, yeah, there was a bad breakup, and there was one girl who, whatever, they didn't like, and there were other issues there. But the whole narrative, this is what's so mind-shocking. The entire Idiot Box narrative built around Columbine isn't even accurate. Everything down to what was planned. There was no plan going around shooting people inside the school. They supposedly, according to available information, this was a planned bombing. There were 2 9.8 kilogram propane bombs planted in the cafeteria. Now, some sources allege they were actually planted at prom. Some allege that they were planted right before lunch. Some allege there were other individuals who planted them. Regardless, based on available information, and you can go, this is right on Wikipedia, but the narrative that was built around it are these 2 outsiders that were relentlessly bullied. That was not the case. I mean, Dylan was in drama club or the theater productions. I mean, these were individuals with a fairly sizable circle of friends, some of which, there's a conspiracy after the fact, that they knew about their plan in the first place. And regardless, they had all these friends, they were part of clubs, or they did these school projects, they were involved, obviously they liked video games. These were not loners who didn't have a single friend other than each other, who had no interactions with girls. This is not what was painted, that were relentlessly bullied, just the 2 of them. They were part of a club, the Trenchcoat Mafia, which after the fact tried to distance themselves, so then there's all these misconceptions about that, people saying they never actually belonged to the club, and there's a lot of shady business there on the exact membership at the exact time of that particular day. But either way, this was all painted as, oh, it was just bullying. And they were just so relentlessly bullied by these jocks that they wanted to kill them all. And whereas they plotted this to bomb the school. And then there's another, obviously there's the conspiracy regarding the possibility that one or both of them were actually raped by police officers in January, several months prior before the shooting, where they wanted revenge on cops. Obviously, that's tricky to dissect because, I mean, there are references to it, the vengeance on the pigs, or however they wrote it down. There's references to it, but there's also evidence that this was planned before that date. And we're going to get into even more misconceptions. Did Dylan Klebold even want to go on this so-called spree? They used NBK, Natural Born Killers, as kind of a code word for what their plan was. Now, some students believe this was all in jest. Others believe they were serious, and others still believe they had a lot of assistance that day. And there's a lot of things that don't add up, but I did want to address just the main narrative is false. So just, Because obviously it would make more sense to the layman if they really were these two complete outsiders with no other friends, relentlessly bullied, no girls, no life of any kind. It would make more sense. And of course, the cognitive dissonant and the mentally weak, they want things to make sense. So the media ran with that narrative instead of truly trying to understand the root causes on why these individuals did this. It's beyond bizarre. I mean, this is one of the largest false narratives that continues to be perpetuated in the media, that it was simply just bullying and these guys lashed out. So, yeah, I mean, again, not that there was zero bullying. Obviously, there is evidence that Eric Harris, there was some bullying in his direction. But there's also plenty of evidence that they were the bullies. And they bullied other kids as well. And evidence that, they had jobs. I mean, it's really crazy how people think that this was just that simple. That this could be brought to this simple of a level. And it really can. So let's dive into some of the conspiracies here and just how the media handled it. So there's a Columbine subreddit, actually, where there's a lot of discussion that goes on in this direction. There's a really, really astute post by Abandoned X Earth, who calls himself a Columbine researcher, that a giant chunk of news footage recorded was either not archived or purposely never released because journalists wanted to cover up the fact that they broadcasted footage of police recklessly firing into the school, showing uncensored bodies on national TV, showing the infamous 1 am bleeding to death sign, but ignoring it, resulting in the death of Dave Sanders, and most controversially, interviewing students right after they escaped the school and immediately asking sensitive questions. Everyone was critical of the police and the media for handling the situation very, very, very poorly, and they wanted to push forward that narrative that the police actually saved the day when they really didn't. So covering up any existing footage that shows their mistakes would spare them of any criticism. This also goes hand in hand with the theory that law enforcement injured students. Now, there was actually an entire lawsuit launched here, and a lot of people don't know this. So this is an article from the New York Times by Michael Janofsky, January 6, 2002. Parents want new inquiry into Columbine killings. Brian E. Rohbau and Susan A. Patrone never much trusted the official account of what happened that awful day at Columbine High School. The report by Sheriff John P. Stone of Jefferson County concluded that their son Daniel and the 12 others killed on April 20th, 1999 were all shot by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, Columbine students who then shot themselves to death. But Daniel's parents said a growing list of inconsistencies among accounts of the shooting had led them to suspect that their son had been killed not by the rampaging teenagers, but by a police officer. They just couldn't prove it. Now they believe they can. A woman who was unknown to investigators until recently has offered to testify that in a chance encounter 2 days after the shooting, a Denver police officer told her that he believed he had accidentally shot a boy outside the school. That boy was Daniel, his parents said. In a long interview this week, the parents, who divorced in 1990, said the woman's testimony would not only conflict with Sheriff Stone's version of events, but would also show that the sheriff's department had tried to hide what really happened in the worst school shooting in American history. And this was, of course, published in 2002. As a result, Mr. Rohrbau, Miss Patrone, and families of other Columbine victims have filed a motion in federal district court here asking Chief Judge Louis T. Babcock, who dismissed several lawsuits by the families against Jefferson County and the sheriff in late November, to reinstate them. "I'm not interested in money," Mr. Rohrbau said. "I just want answers." The motion includes a signed affidavit from the woman, Celine Marquez, a Jefferson County school administrator, describing her conversation with the police officer, Sergeant Daniel P. O'Shea. It also lists statements by the sheriff's department since the shootings that the plaintiffs say conflict with each other and with findings by other agencies, including the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. So one agency actually concluded that it was Eric Harris who shot him, the other Dylan Klebold, so obviously that's an issue there. Sheriff I am very angry, Mr. Rauerbau said, reviewing his failed efforts to gain more information from Sheriff Stone. We are fighting this blue wall, and I don't think he has the courage to stand up and tell the truth. Sheriff Stone declined a request for an interview, as he has since the days after the shootings. After Mr. Rauerbau and Ms. Patron filed the latest motion, Sheriff Stone asked the Sheriff's Department to neighboring El Paso County to review all matters related to Daniel's killings. With that about to start, and with the new lawsuits possible, Sheriff Stone's spokeswoman, Jackie Tallman, said he stood by his original report. The El Paso investigation is the third review of the shootings after Sheriff Stone's internal investigation in 1999, and a broader effort a year later by a panel appointed by Governor Bill Owens that sought Sheriff Stone's testimony. He declined, citing pending litigation. The panel's report was highly critical of Sheriff Stone and said the massacre might not have happened had his department acted on previous information about the teenage attackers. And that's, of course, another rabbit hole where Brooks Brown and his parents reported Eric Harris for various incidents, and they were never properly investigated. Mr. Rauerbau, Ms. Patron, and parents of other Columbine victims say the new investigation is yet another toothless effort because it lacks subpoena power and cannot place people under oath. They contend that only a court case or grand jury can produce a full and truthful accounting of the events that day. Governor Owens this week encouraged the Jefferson County District Attorney Dave Thomas to call a grand jury to investigate the Rauerbau shooting. Recommendation Mr. Thomas's office said he was considering. We need to let facts lead us to a conclusion, said Mr. Rauerbau, 42, owner of a company that installs custom home entertainment centers. We don't need a conclusion, then an effort to find facts that fit. Daniel, who was 15, was killed outside the school running away from the attackers, witnesses said. A bullet to the chest, one of 3 that struck Daniel, was the fatal shot, the autopsy report said. At the time, Miss Patron, 42, had been remarried for 8 years to Rich Patron, a real estate agent, but the search for more information brought her and Mr. Rauerbau together, they said, in a bittersweet fashion, with support from Mr. Patron and from Lisa Rauerbau, a nurse whom Mr. Rauerbau married in 1999. Miss Patron, who helps her husband in the real estate business, said, Dan was my only child and the only child I'm ever going to have. Sitting back 5 years from now, I would feel really horrible if I didn't do everything I could to find out more information. Daniel's parents said they began questioning Sheriff Stone's account of their son's killing when the request for the return of Daniel's clothes was refused. Later, they said their suspicions grew after Jefferson County investigators failed to explain inconsistencies between their official account and other reports. How, for example, could Mr. Klebold have shot Daniel in the chest at close range, as the sheriff's report said, if Mr. Klebold had been behind him and there was no gunpowder on Daniel's clothes, as the Colorado Bureau of Investigation found? The parents also wondered why the sheriff's report said all victims had been shot before the police arrived. 11 months after the shootings, Mr. Rauerbau and Miss Patron secretly taped-recorded a conversation with Jim Taylor, a family friend and a deputy with the neighboring Arapahoe County Sheriff's Department, in which he said he had seen a boy later believed to be Daniel shot outside the school. Further, the parents said a ballistics test by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation determined that Daniel had not been killed by Mr. Klebold's gun, and that tests of Mr. Harris's gun were inconclusive. No other gun was tested, including Sergeant O'Shea's, which, like two of the teenagers' 4 guns, was a 9mm. But Mr. Rauerbau and Miss Patron said it was not until Judge Babcock dismissed the lawsuits that they found what they believed was the truth. After reading about the dismissals, Ms. Marquez told 2 friends, Judy and Randy Brown, that she had encountered Sergeant O'Shea at an elementary school near Columbine 2 days after the shootings, and he told her he believed he had shot an innocent student. The Browns had befriended Daniel's parents after also growing frustrated with Sheriff Stone. They had contacted his department a year before the shootings to say that Mr. Harris had threatened over the internet to kill their son Brooks. Brooks was not shot. The department secured but never executed a search warrant for Mr. Harris's computer. After hearing Miss Marquez's account, the Browns called Mr. Rauerbau and Miss Patron, who met with Miss Marquez. She offered an affidavit in which she describes Sergeant O'Shea as being very emotional, adding that he mentioned several times the possibility of friendly fire. Mr. Rohrbaugh said he was especially alarmed by Sergeant O'Shea's assertion to Miss Marquez that he had been assured that ballistic tests had cleared him of any accidental killing. This was 2 days later, Mr. Rohrbaugh said. The autopsy wasn't even finished, much less evidence collection. How could he have been cleared? Unless there was some kind of cover-up. And furthermore, why would he... would that still mean that police shot at running students and they were just hoping that they didn't kill them because there was also fire from behind them? So is this an admission of guilt just in general by the department that said Sergeant O'Shea was cleared? What is there to be cleared from if they never fired upon students? Neither Sergeant O'Shea nor Miss Marquez responded to requests for comment. Sergeant O'Shea has not spoken publicly about what happened. Miss Marquez told the Rocky Mountain News last week that she had told several friends about her encounter with the officer, but had not known that the families were unaware of what she said he had told her. I just always assumed everybody knew about it, she said. Mr. Rohrbaugh and Miss Patrone said that their longtime friend, Mr. Taylor, provided additional signs of a cover-up this week when he denied ever telling them that he had seen a boy being shot. Wait, don't they have him on audio recording? In a statement released by the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office that contradicts his words on the tape made in 2000, Mr. Taylor said, quote, has not said anything to Rohrbaugh family that could lead them to believe he witnessed any shots being fired at Columbine, end quote. A message left for Mr. Taylor seeking further comment was not returned. He's being pressured, Mr. Rohrbaugh said of his friend. He's not going to go against them. But he and Miss Patrone brightened at the thought that the conflict might finally help persuade the court or county DA to take action. There will come a point when this will be all over, Mr. Rohrbaugh said. Either they will have the answers or they don't. All we want is the truth and a true accounting of what happened. We will dismiss the lawsuits if they just tell us what happened. And this is rough. I mean, this is just a travesty across the board. The event itself, the police handling of the event, the media after the event, the continual cover-up of the event. And I'm not going to go specifically into the basement tapes. There's a lot of tapes. A lot of portions have been released, but supposedly the majority have not. And some people theorize that's because they had help planning it, possible FBI agents, possible MK Ultra cover-up. I mean, those are the real dark sides of these conspiracies. And going back to the Columbine subreddit, let me read another post here. There's a theory that Eric and Dylan's outside circle tried to join them after they heard a shooting was taking place. The rumor is based on the fact that the police found a couple of high school kids with trench coats near the school hiding in the bushes with BB rifles. Also that the perpetrator of the subway murders that happened a year after Columbine is somehow connected to the shooters. And some people actually don't even know about the subway murders. And I'll be getting to that at the end of the podcast. That's just mind-shocking in and of itself. It may or may not be connected, but it's just eerie. And that is the same subway that Rachel Joy Scott worked at. So there was a couple issues here. There's actually a video of kids being arrested in a field nearby, and there's a lot of strange oddities that have never been properly explained. There's a surface explanation, which I'll go over. Apparently, Jacob Apodaca and Chris Wisher were in Weaver Park near Columbine High School when they allegedly saw a shooter duck down in the bushes with a shotgun in hand. One possible explanation here is Larry Petty, a 27-year-old man, was arrested after running toward the school with a knife and an empty .22 caliber bolt-action rifle. He claimed it was an air-pump .22 cal BB pellet gun, but the arresting officer opened the bolt to check for ammunition, so he would have been able to tell. Perry claimed that a student called him at 11:30 a.m. to stop the gunman, though he later admitted he hadn't known anyone at the school since the early 90s. I mean, there's not a lot that makes sense here. John Ungerland said he saw Robert Perry driving a red Geo Metro near the school at about 2:30 p.m. According to him, someone fitting Joe Stair's description was hanging out the window with a pistol, and they were both wearing trench coats. His girlfriend, Jenny Matthews, also got a small glimpse of them, and though she could not identify either one, she gave similar descriptions of their appearances, hair color, ages, dress. However, she said the object one of them was holding was 2 feet long, and she thought it was a camera. Camera or not, it's still plenty suspicious. And I'll be getting into the theory with the possibility that there were other shooters. So according to... So there's a number of reports that have been released. And in these reports, there's over 100 witnesses that report seeing more than 2 gunmen or individuals that were clearly adults who not only did not resemble Harris or Klebold, but no teenagers at the school, and they were described as older adults. So, and 40 of these witnesses, and this is in all the paperwork, this is in the documents that have been released, over 40 witnesses actually identified who they saw by name that was not Eric Harris or Dylan Klebold. Also, there were at least 99 bombs found in and around the school. So the theory goes, this is leading many to question the official narrative because, and these are posts from various subreddits, including the conspiracy subreddit on Reddit, which gets a lot of action, of course. How could 2 teenagers have transported and positioned all of these devices? Why do so many witnesses identify others, not Harris and Klebold, as carrying duffel bags into the school? Sheriff John Stone said, "I've never thought it was just 2 suspects because of the amount of stuff that was brought in, but we don't have enough to charge anyone." This was Associated Press, July 29th, 1999. So he actually made this statement. More points here from the conspiracy subreddit. Following a tour of the school, Governor Bill Owens told Channel 9 News, April 23rd, 1999, quote, "The officers in there are convinced there had to be more people involved. There's just too much stuff in there," end quote.
And new evidence tonight, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris may not have acted alone. FBI sources tell CBS News the detonator on the propane tank bomb found in the kitchen is so sophisticated, it is unlikely that the 2 made it themselves. Bill?
Why did at least 35 witnesses report hearing gunfire or explosions after 12 p.m. when Harris and Klebold were alleged to have killed themselves? According to Denver Post, April 21st, 1999, by 3:45 p.m., shots still rang out inside the school. That's quite curious, isn't it? And even the most devout coincidence theorists have failed to explain that as far as I was able to find. Why did so many witnesses recall hearing gunfire and explosions simultaneously or near simultaneously in different parts of the building when the suspects were officially together for the entirety of the attack? I mean, you could even pick some stuff out on some of the news footage where you can see muzzle flash on different floors. I don't know. It's weird. Why did a number of students recall hearing fully automatic gunfire when no automatics were officially used? How would the suspects have obtained fully automatic weapons? Why does the final report of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office indicate that the suspects never went to science rooms 1 and 8 when numerous shell casings were discovered in this area? Why does the final report of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office include no mention of one suspect's brief exit on the east side of the school as reported by multiple witnesses? If the suspect on the roof was in fact an innocent repairman, why did witnesses see him aiming a weapon? Were shell casings found on the roof as some have said? Did a film of 1 or 2 of the suspects on the roof provided to the police exist as 3 witnesses maintain? Why do police maintain that Harris and Klebold set the diversionary bombs at South Wadsworth when no physical evidence or witnesses suggest this? Why have they ignored witnesses who identified another suspect, a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, as fleeing one of the bombs? Why did police announce that the shotguns recovered had no serial numbers when their serial numbers appear in the police files? Were 4 shotguns found, 2 with serial numbers and 2 without? Why didn't police investigate where the high point 9mm rifle and the pump-action shotgun used in the attack came from? Harris and Klebold. Why were none of Harris's and Klebold's fingerprints found on all but 2 of the items seized by the police? Whose fingerprints, if any, were on the weapons? Why would 2 students who, contrary to popular myth, who were not bullied, were not psychopaths, and did not hate everyone, commit a suicide attack on their high school only weeks before graduation? And then, of course, that is disputed with Eric Harris, who may or may not have been a psychopath. He was on Volox medication. Why did Harris and Klebold continue to hand in assignments, studied for tests, and select colleges? Why did Harris make plans with his friends in New York for that summer? And that could actually possibly be explained by some kind of split personality disorder or other mental issues. I see a lot of people pointing to that. People who legitimately committed suicide did make plans sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean they did or they didn't. Obviously, there's a lot of funny business here that does need to be examined. I'm just pointing out that that doesn't automatically mean that this couldn't have been planned simply because he said he would hang out with friends in New York. Why, in the photo of their bodies, is Klebold, who is left-handing, holding the Tech 9 in his right hand? How would Klebold, holding the gun in his right hand, shoot himself in the left temple? Why is Harris's shotgun under his leg? The blood splatter evidence indicates they were lying prone in the exact positions they were photographed. Were they unconscious or sedated when they were killed? Why is there no record of an interview with Eric Harris's psychiatrist? Cover-up. Why did the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office destroy the basement tapes? And they actually didn't. I mean, this is an older post. I believe there's 3 copies. The FBI has a copy in their vault. The state of Colorado did their research, their investigation. They had copies. And there were also rumors that, I might have to do a whole episode on the tapes, that they actually sent tapes or gave copies of some tapes to their friends. So there's an inside circle that has copies of VHS tapes. Some of them have popped up on eBay over the years. Again, nobody really knows if they're legitimate or not. Why are dozens of interviews with students missing, including many of the students who were in the science hall? Why are there still thousands of pages of government and law enforcement files on the massacre unavailable to the public more than 20 years later? Why were some police officers told not to file reports even though they were on scene? Why aren't the reports of gunshot residue for Harris, Klebold, and other suspects available to the public? Why isn't evidence taken from the other suspects' computers available to the public? Why won't the school district release their report on the shooting, which included lengthy disciplinary records of Trenchcoat Mafia members? Why hasn't footage from the administration and library areas been released to the public? Is it sheer coincidence that the footage of the bombs being placed in the cafeteria is missing, allegedly because a custodian switched the tape at precisely this moment? Why does local media refuse to release their footage from the first half hour of the attack? Why have some former students indicated they were blown off or even intimidated by police? Why do so many students' families believe they were targeted and harassed after the attack? Strange calls, phones tapped, mail opened, and other highly upsetting occurrences. A covert operation. Why was an affidavit that was drafted to search Harris's home for explosives, based on statements on his website, in March 1998 never filed? Why did the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office hide this from public knowledge until September 2001? Why did a group of 20 state officials meet several days after the massacre and conclude they would suppress this information? Why were the originals of the affidavit destroyed? Why did police and emergency services refuse to enter the building or save victims for hours? Why wasn't school resource officer Neil Gardner present when the shooting started? Why was a sniper who had a clear shot on one of the armed suspects ordered not to fire? Why were the ATF, FBI, and U.S. Army present? Who was the 2-star general visible on tape, and what function did he serve? Why was the memorial days later ringed with military trucks? Why were law enforcement personnel, including a sheriff from Jefferson County, at Columbine High School earlier that morning? Uh-oh. I actually didn't know about that. That never bodes well. Why did FEMA conduct a 4-day disaster drill in 1997 designed specifically to address the needs of Jefferson County, in which future Sheriff John Stone and a number of county officials participated? So this is actually a post from November 6, 2005, tapatalk.com, and these are forums that assemble posts from various places. This post is from Star Viego. It was a dark and stormy night, so I spent my time surfing the web looking for Columbine-related info. I came across this website, mipt.org, and applied to access 2 publications they had on Columbine. I thought they were internet downloads, but they came through the mail. One of them was a 36-page copy of a manuscript titled The Shootings at Columbine High School, Responding to a New Kind of Terrorism. It was written by Susan Rosegrant for Richard Falkenrath, Assistant Professor in Public Policy, and Arnold Howitt, Executive Director, Taubman Center for State and Local Government, for use at the Executive Session on Domestic Preparedness, John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. Funding was provided by the Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice, 0301. Most of it consists of making excuses as to law enforcement's slow response, confusion, communications problems, but they did have a pretty good analysis of the chain of command during the incident. Incident command structure, this is page 3. These are select excerpts by this poster. In 1997, while still a commissioner, Stone had helped organize a trip to Emmitsburg, Maryland, for county representatives and local organization leaders to attend a Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, disaster training course. The 4-day session, which FEMA designed specifically to address the needs of Jefferson County, Stone says, included training and tabletop exercises that had improved the county's implementation of incident command, a clearly defined incident management structure designating, among other things, command roles, tasks to be accomplished, and a system to assign responsibility for each task. So all these individuals got specific training on this. Not that far before Columbine. Comment, how very nice of FEMA. I wonder about the exact nature of these exercises. I wonder if any school officials attended. Page 1, over the next few hours, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and other law enforcement agencies first secured the perimeter of the building so that the shooters could not escape, then struggled to evacuate students, teachers, and staff. Page 7, at least 8 Jeffco deputies stationed themselves around Columbine, forming an inner perimeter to watch the building's 25 exterior doors. Captain Robert Armstrong, the on-call commander for the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office and perhaps the most experienced commander on scene, stepped in and directed Denver Police and the Colorado State Patrol to form a second perimeter away from the school to further secure the area. Lieutenant Manwaring, Jeffco SWAT, was first command level representative present at 11:36 a.m. At 11:45 a.m., Jeffco Lieutenant Dave Walcher, the top-ranked Jeffco representative on scene, drove up and assumed command upon arrival and told Terry Manwaring to get SWAT members into the school as soon as possible. This is from page 7. A few minutes later, Jeffco Undersheriff John Dunaway arrived. Dunaway officially appointed Lieutenant Walcher as incident commander. So Walcher was officially in command as of 11:45 a.m. Page 10, Chief Pessamir and Jeffco Lieutenant Dave Walcher, meanwhile, set up a unified command incorporating both the medical and the law enforcement response. Page 13, by 12:40, Jeffco's mobile command bus had arrived, and instead of grouping around Sergeant Phil High's patrol car, the command post operation moved inside the bus. In addition to Jeffco's incident commander, Lieutenant Dave Walcher, who was often joined by Undersheriff Dunaway and sometimes by Sheriff Stone, command-level representatives included Captain Robert Armstrong from Arapahoe, Division Chief Jerry Whitman from the Denver Police, Major John Wise from the Colorado State Patrol, Commander Bob Brandt from the Littleton Police, and either Chief Pessamere or Division Chief Chuck Burdick representing Littleton Fire. According to Sheriff Stone, Jeffco established Incident Command using the same basic management model that the Jeffco representatives had studied and trained on during the 4-day FEMA workshop a year and a half earlier. My position in this thing was almost like a symphony director, Stone says. You're watching every one of those things going on, but you have to make sure every instrument's playing properly. With Walcher handling Incident Command, Stone says Dunaway took charge of operations while he himself was trying to do all the support stuff, get the investigation going, get the county involved, the media, and all these other support things that you have to do. Page 13, everybody asks questions like, who's actually in charge, recalls one command-level officer. Well, quite frankly, I couldn't tell you. If I had to guess from being around the command post, I would say it was a combination of Jerry Whitman, Robert Armstrong, John Dunaway, and Walcher. Those would be the key four. Page 13, in addition, some responders say Dunaway and Stone didn't give Walcher the support he needed. Page 14, Dunaway, however, spent a lot of time outside the command post talking with school administrators, law enforcement, and county officials, and others who had come to the vehicle. And although Dunaway was in charge of operations for the incident, neither he nor anyone else appeared to have assumed full responsibility for assigning jobs such as traffic control, logistics, communications, and officer relief, all key pieces of Incident Command. Page 14, as for Sheriff Stone, one law enforcement official recalls, he looked pretty much shell-shocked. So here are some more tidbits and oddities from page 1. Witnesses were providing conflicting reports about the number of armed attackers, their location in the building, and their ages. Comment, remember a few witnesses thought one of the gunmen was as old as his early 30s. Now, see, there was one student who was tall and lanky, like Klebold, and we'll get into that. So it does make sense, like possibly there could have been some misidentification going on in the scrambles and the panic. But for those that clearly identified some guy in his 30s, I mean, that's damning. That's pretty damning. Okay, page 5. None of the students huddling behind patrol cars could identify Harris or Klebold as the perpetrators, nor did they know if the shooters were high school age or older. Page 2. It would be months before some investigators accepted that the carnage unleashed that day had been the work of just those two. Comment, I knew Stone was dragging his feet on this, but who are the other IOs who refused to believe the official story? Interesting. Page 3, Under Sheriff John Dunaway, a friend of Stone who had served with him in the Lakewood PD years before, had most recently served as director of the Jeffco Public School District's Risk Management Department, responsible in part for physical security in the schools. Page 4, when students and staff first heard shots at 11:19 that morning, many assumed it was part of senior prank day or that the two were filming a video. It was actually 11:15 that the shooting started, though. Okay. Page 4. Due to legal proceedings related to the shootings at Columbine, many law enforcement responders declined to be interviewed for this case study. This essay was copyrighted in 2001. Page 6. Several of the first Denver and Littleton police officers to arrive had children in the school. Huh. How did that play in their role to not go in? I mean, that must have been tough. Page 6, dispatch had reported a possible suspect on the football field and the possibility of hostages being held inside. Page 7, the student holed up in the kitchen with a cell phone, Depew, told the Denver police officer on the line, Lietz, that he could hear a gunman nearby with school keys and a walkie-talkie, later ascribed to custodians. Page 9, Littleton Fire Department Battalion Chief Ray Rond, shift commander, arrived at 11:34, and he soon spotted a girl sitting on the corner across the street from the school who had been shot in the ankle, probably Stephanie Munson, and took her to a private ambulance. I stayed in front of the school, set up command, and said, I need police officers for command in front of the school, Ron recalls, and nobody came. They just literally took two bodies, threw them in one rescue, basically right on top of each other. The ambulance that had sped out from behind the school pulled up, and the paramedics jumped out screaming for help. They opened up the back of the ambulance, and the blood was just running out of it, Ron says. Page 12. Almost from the moment the first SWAT team entered at about 12:06 p.m., the actual targets were gone. Comment. Interesting use of words. The suspects were not dead, they were gone. Possible reference to escaped gunmen. Page 12. Although law enforcement and the media initially seized on the trenchcoat mafia angle, students identified with this set were later found to be so loosely organized that they didn't constitute a real group, and Harris and Klebold weren't even members of that crowd. Comment, yeah, I've heard it all before. And just to clarify, there was some kind of official trenchcoat mafia, and Harris and Klebold might have not been officially part of it, but they had mutual friends in the group, so they were close friends with some of the members, not all of the members, so there were certain members that probably didn't even know them, or barely knew them, so that accounts for some of the confusion. Page 13, the bomb that initially exploded in the field was inside a backpack and detonated after a road worker picked up the bag and tossed it aside. A bomb in a second backpack nearby exploded soon after, probably ignited by the fire. Comment. So there was definitely a second bomb in the second backpack left at the South Wadsworth location. This is the first I've heard that the second device also detonated. Media, page 22. By the time he got to Columbine at about 11:45, Jeffco Public Information Officer Steve Davis said there were at least 2 television crews and a radio station on scene. Page 16. At 11:47, a local television station ran the first report of possible shootings at Columbine High School. By noon, area TV stations had switched to full-time coverage. Page 18. Because of the bomb outside the west doors, the SWAT team didn't enter there, nor did it go through the open emergency exit door leading straight to the library, out of which a number of distraught students had escaped about an hour and a half earlier, because there was a bomb visible there. Comment. Another bomb blocking the North Library exit door. This is the first I've heard of this. Page 12. At 12:14, although in reality Harris and Klebold were already dead, students on a cell phone in the school reported to 911 that the shooters were nearby. Page 18. Although Harris and Klebold had been dead for more than a half hour, the command post was still receiving regular cell phone reports of gunshots and explosions from students and staff hidden throughout the school, which further complicated the search. Investigators later speculated that those hidden were actually hearing the sounds of SWAT teams breaking down doors. Page 19. By 1:15, investigators had gone to both students' houses. Page 21, reports of earlier gunman sightings coming in at the same time as more up-to-date reports led responders to, quote, think there were 6 or more shooters in the school, end quote. Let me read that again. Reports of earlier gunman sightings coming in at the same time as more up-to-date reports led responders to, quote, think there were 6 or more shooters in the school, end quote. So not just 1 or 2 extra guys. They thought there were 6 or more. Other estimates were 5 or more. Sanders, page 24. Shortly before 2 o'clock, Jeffco SWAT Barry Williams had received the first reports from dispatch alluding to the critically injured Dave Sanders, one alerting him to an injured teacher in the science area, while another, later found to have identified the wrong room, said a male was doing CPR on a victim in the library and that a blue and white shirt was hanging from the doorknob to signal the victim's presence. From the reports he had received, it wasn't clear whether there was just one victim or a few in different parts of the school. Comment, I don't remember anybody giving Sanders or anyone else CPR, do you? Page 25, according to one report, the Lakewood SWAT team, which had positioned itself south of the school, volunteered to try to rescue the bleeding victim upstairs, having seen the sign in the window. But Incident Commander Walcher vetoed the attempt, claiming there would be too much risk of surprising teams already inside and precipitating dangerous crossfire. That's messed up. Page 26, at 2:42, Williams' team finally reached the critically injured teacher, Dave Sanders. They awaited for a paramedic to arrive. After the 2 SWAT members waited for about 20 to 30 minutes, a Denver paramedic finally arrived and declared that he had died. Couldn't they have gotten him outside? I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. Page 27, the only untoward occurrence And of course, the conspiracy theorist might say they didn't want him to survive if he knew what really happened, if it wasn't the official story. Page 27, the only untoward occurrence of the second sweep of SWAT was when a SWAT team used frangible slugs fired from a shotgun to blow the hinges off a locked door without warning the other teams in advance, sparking a short-lived armed response. Comment. This is interesting. A standoff between law enforcement teams. I wonder if this has anything to do with the shots heard from the gym around 3:30 p.m., which some reports indicate resulted in police casualties. I have not heard that either. There's a lot of funny business about official reports on this lost report. I mean, it's not really lost, but I haven't, this incident command structure report, which I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this. Page 28, responders came from a half a dozen sheriff's offices, 20 area police departments, etc., and the Colorado National Guard. Comment, I would like to see the after-action report of the National Guard. Page 29, an overly tired technician lowering a pipe bomb into a special disposer trailer at 10:40 p.m. bumped the device into the side, setting off an explosion that threw 15 live bombs out of the trailer. Wow. Page 30, although Arapahoe Bomb Squad Joe Dempsey says one of the timed bombs intended to trigger a propane tank did go off, either because the timer worked or because a pipe bomb tossed near it set it off, but it didn't detonate with the force necessary to puncture and ignite the propane tank. See, now this is a mystery that I've long thought about, because from all of their videos in the woods and everything, it seemed like they were pretty good at making bombs. So it was curious why it didn't detonate, but that seems kind of weird that they tossed the pipe bomb to detonate. Wasn't there, so the timer, what happened with the timer? Was the pipe bomb on the timer and not the propane tank? And they thought that the pipe bomb would ignite the propane tank, and then that didn't work? I mean, there's again, none of this has been adequately explained. Another response here, someone actually looked at the 11K report, which is just short for the 11,000 page report, the official Columbine report, regarding the 11,000 documents that have been released relating to the Columbine case. And someone looked through these, well, a lot of people looked through all these, and this particular poster said this: I scoured the index of names from the 11K looking for interviews for the above names in the command structure. However, there is no interview for Stone, Dunaway, or Walcher, Pessamere, Ron, or Burdick, Armstrong, or Campbell, Brandt, John Wise, or Jerry Whitman. So when they tried to piece together what happened on 420, they apparently didn't bother to interview the people in charge during the incident. I mean, is there any excuse for that, unless this was all intentional? There is, supposedly on page 9144, there is an undetailed synopsis of Brandt's duties that day, but no interview. So a few more quotes here from page 2. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, virtually all emergency response agencies involved held psychological debriefings for personnel, some beginning the night of April 20th. We were talking about details and how this is going to affect you, says Arapahoe Sheriff Patrick Sullivan. How many of the bodies did you see? Which ones did you see? Were they girls or boys? What was the situation and how is it going to affect you mentally? Comment. I have noticed a lot of the grief counseling seems to want to know details on what the responders saw. This would be a good way to identify potential troublemakers who are in a position to dispute the official story. Page 2, Stone made several remarks during the investigation that colleagues termed unprofessional, such as openly speculating about possible accomplices to the attack. Comment, it's only unprofessional if the professionals have decided there would be only 2 attackers. There was plenty of evidence that more were involved. Page 3, within the first hour of the operation, the Jeffco County Dispatch Center lost access to the local command post because the radio links were jammed. And of course, the deep conspiracy theorist would say that was set up as well. Page 6, former Captain Robert Armstrong of Arapahoe, who later left to become an agent with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, quote, not one child, teacher, parent, or anybody else was injured with friendly fire, end quote. Interesting. Page 8, Deputy Inspector Joe Dempsey, bomb squad leader for the Arapahoe Sheriff's Office, says the shootings at Columbine demonstrated the importance of involving bomb experts in early tactical decisions. Had bomb technicians deployed along with Lieutenant Terry Manwaring's SWAT team, for example, Dempsey says, they could have told Manwaring that the bombs obstructing the emergency exit from the library posed no risk as long as they weren't moved. Comment. And those library survivors who fled via that route should have waited for the bomb squad too. No first responder should be forced to work in anything other than a totally risk-free environment. Don't you agree? After all, they are government employees, and hence their lives are worth a lot more than the life of an ordinary citizen. By the way, none of the students mentioned anything about a bomb anywhere along their path to safety, which raises the interesting questions of whether the bomb the cops were afraid of was the IED allegedly thrown by someone inside the library at 12:36 to 12:39, according to at least 3 cops on the scene. No wonder this part didn't make it into the final report by the Sheriff's Department. So, wow, was that not mind-shocking? So, this is all from the 36-page manuscript report, The Shootings at Columbine High School Responding to a New Kind of Terrorism, funded by the Office of Justice Programs. Lot of unanswered questions there. So, back to the conspiracy subreddit here. Who scheduled the crisis drills conducted at Columbine in the weeks before the shooting? Was there, as one teacher said, a fire drill expected that morning? I actually was not aware that there were crisis drills conducted at Columbine in the weeks before the shooting. That is somewhat alarming if that's true. I couldn't nail that down. If any of the Mindshock listeners out there have more information on that, or if that was just comments students made that there were these drills, if they were only ever conducted in the weeks before and never prior, that might be suspicious. Were school administrators warned as rumored? Was a bomb found in a trash can as one source indicated? Was a bomb threat phoned into the school that morning as 2 others said? Why wasn't the school evacuated before the attack? I also couldn't find a lot of information on this rumored bomb threat. There were rumors that people were told not to go to school that day, but let's continue here. Is it a coincidence that the 100 school administrators, including a handful from Littleton, attending a workshop entitled Crisis Response, Prepare for the Unthinkable, It Could Happen to You, on April 19th, the day before the attacks? Is it coincidence that the main presenters at this workshop were the Jefferson County School Response Team? Uh-oh, we're going firmly into Mindshock land now, because I did not know this either. This is the Daily Camera. April 21st, 1999. Shooting follows crisis talks. Coordinator had said Jeffco response team was outstanding by Margie McAllister, camera staff writer. More than 100 school officials, including a handful from Littleton, sat through a state workshop Monday, which was prophetically titled Crisis Response, Prepare for the Unthinkable, It Could Happen to You. The main presenters, the Jefferson County School Response Team. Jeffco was very organized, outstanding, said coordinator Janice A. Hartman-Gruber. When I heard the shooting was Columbine, I thought, well, they have a good response team. Really? That's the first thing she thought? That's really weird. Hartman-Gruber said she also felt like I was dying inside when she first heard about the Columbine High School shootings. I mean, that's a little bit more, seems like a more appropriate response. The news came immediately after saying goodbye to the keynote speaker, Karen McCustian from Paducah, Kentucky, where a student opened fire at a high school prayer meeting, killing 3 girls. McCustian was flying out of Denver International Airport to another conference on violence in the schools. Hartman-Gruber said that at first she could not believe the Littleton incident was happening a day after her emergency preparation class. It was too eerie, she said, of the coincidence. Hartman-Gruber, Deputy Executive Director of Colorado Association of School Executives, set up Monday's annual workshop to deal with issues that appeal to school districts throughout the state. The program was co-sponsored by the Colorado Association of Secondary School Administrators. We wanted people to know how to handle a crisis before it happened, Hartman Gruber said. We don't want districts to sit back and wonder what to do. What people heard is the importance of having a plan in effect, of being coordinated, of having ways to keep the lines open so that the hospital and police, the parents can get there. So she thinks they actually did a good job here? That's weird. And wow. All I can say is wow. I mean, that is a heck of a coincidence. And there seems to be one in a lot of these big events. Weird. Very, very weird. Why were 6 of 7 of the teams assigned to investigate the attack headed or co-headed by an FBI agent, with the one exception headed by a former FBI agent? Why didn't the FBI's lead investigator, Dwayne Fusilier, recuse himself from the investigation after it emerged that his son was a student at Columbine who had produced a video in 1997 with several other students, including a close friend of the suspects, depicting trench-coated gunmen shooting through the halls of the school? That is definitely curious. That is definitely curious. May 13th, 1999, the Denver Post. FBI agent downplays son's film, by Howard Pankratz, Denver Post legal affairs writer, May 13th. An FBI agent investigating the Columbine High School shooting, whose son helped produce a video parody in which the school is destroyed, says the film is a comedy and not a depiction of gratuitous violence. Does that make it worse or better? Dwayne Fusilier also said the participation of his son Scott in the video was made more than 2 years before the April 20th massacre does not compromise his ability to investigate the case. What in what universe? If your son was this is weird. Especially if he knew the shooters, or friends of the shooters, the same group of people. I've searched my heart and soul for anything that was wrong here, that the kids who made the videos should not have done, Fusilier said, and there was certainly no evil intent. It is a terrible irony, and they would never make that video again. Fusilier said he was speaking to the Denver Post as a Columbine parent, not in his capacity as an FBI agent. Doesn't that... even saying something like that, doesn't that make it painfully obvious he should not be heading this investigation? Scott Fusilier, now a college sophomore majoring in film and television production, said Wednesday that the group of Columbine students who made the video intended it as a complete comedy. We wish everyone would understand that it was a comedy that makes fun of violence in movies and on TV, said Fusilier 19. We intended to make fun of action movies and how absurd they are. Other news organizations have raised questions about the video and whether Fusilier can investigate the Columbine case objectively. Even if there was no video, he's even stating it himself. He's speaking as a parent of somebody who went to the high... it's weird. The 9.5-minute video was made as part of a class exercise and shown to Columbine High School students in early 1997. Scott Fusilier, then a senior, acted in the video and helped produce it. It consists of 4 primary characters. One character, the bad guy, is intent on vaporizing Columbine by shooting a beam from a satellite hovering high over Colorado. Another character, a good guy, who wears a trench coat, is intent on stopping the bad guy from vaporizing the school. The third character is a fellow who mistakenly thinks the good guy stole his pen. The fourth character is a fellow who believes that he was cut off in traffic by the one who lost his pen. During the video, the trench-coated good guy fires a gun at the bad guy as the bad guy runs out of the school. During the next few minutes, the characters shoot weapons at one another at various locations away from the school, never hitting each other. They finally end in a standoff. At that point, they decide to set aside their differences. However, they don't stop the plot to vaporize the school. The final scene shows the 4 walking away from the school. As they do, a beam comes out of the sky, and Columbine is vaporized. Scott Fusilier said Wednesday that he knew neither Eric Harris nor Dylan Klebold, the 2 Columbine shooters who killed 13 before turning their guns on themselves. He also said that when he was at the school, he never knew of a group called the Trenchcoat Mafia, to which Harris and Klebold allegedly belong. I believe we all believe that, right? Dwayne Fusilier responded to Columbine on April 20th after receiving reports of gunfire and explosions at the school. He also responded as a Columbine parent. His youngest son, Brian, was in the school cafeteria at the... Okay, so he's got another son who was actually there during the shooting, and he's the lead investigator? This is weird. And managed to escape after seeing one of the bombs explode. Fusilier said that when he got home about 9 p.m., he was met by Brian, and they hugged and cried. It was all I could do, Fusilier said. He was safe. Fusilier said he believes he can act as one of the investigative supervisors and sees no conflict of interest. However, he said if either the FBI or the Jeffco County or Jeffco Sheriff's Department believes there's a conflict, he will immediately step down. He said the issue has been discussed internally and he remains on the case. Fusilier said one girl who lost a brother in the massacre came up to him recently and assured him that she and others who saw the video recognized it was intended as a comedy. None of us students who saw that in any way saw it as threatening or a violent movie. Fusilier quoted the Columbine graduate as saying, "We thought it was very funny and we appreciated it." Is there any way we can verify that statement? All right. Okay. Wow. I mean, the amount of coincidences here. I mean, this is mind-shocking. There's quite a lot of coincidences here. Why was the U.S. Attorney's Office consulted on prosecutive decisions in this case? Why didn't the governor's office give Justice Erickson subpoena power? How could the Columbine Review Commission conduct an investigation without subpoena power? Why did investigators show a remarkable lack of curiosity about connections with numerous similar school violence-related incidents occurring around the same time in the Metro Denver area and around the country? I have to do a dedicated podcast on that because that's a major rabbit hole. A couple other coincidences in the aftermath. This was posted by Toronto's Angry Ghost. Is it a coincidence that so many unexplained suicides and homicides occurred in the area after the attack? Bobby Patterson, an ex-con who knew the suspects and victim Isaiah Scholes and allegedly hung himself in his home in Wheat Ridge, Colorado on April 29th, 1999. His mother said he did not want to go to jail again. This is from page 21470 from the JCSO files. Sean Brenner, student of a nearby school who committed suicide on May 6th, 1999. A week after the massacre, he reportedly told a friend that he felt guilty because he had heard a rumor about an impending attack on Columbine. Page 24945. Would that be enough to commit suicide? That's weird. Dana Plato, an actress who died of an alleged prescription overdose in Oklahoma, some believe it was murder, on May 8, 1999, weeks after leaving the home of Rachel Scott, whose family had briefly taken her in. Scott was officially the first to be killed. Her diary contained cryptic statements that she suspected she would soon be killed, possibly shot. Plato's whereabouts on April 20th are unknown, but her name appears on the Master Index of Names. Corey Hager, Columbine student, was killed in a vehicle accident in North Dakota, July 10th, 1999. Hager was officially off campus when the shooting occurred, despite two witnesses placing him in the cafeteria. His interview is missing from the files. Carla Ann Hochhalter, the mother of wounded, paralyzed student Anne-Marie Hochhalter, allegedly shot herself in a gun store, October 22nd, 1999. According to the BBC, a second round was fired after she shot herself in the face. There is no explanation as to how she would have loaded the gun. She would not have been given bullets, and the store clerk unfortunately claims he had his back turned. Anne-Marie had told investigators she could identify the shooters. This is weird. So this is BBC News, October 23rd, 1999. America's Columbine mother commits suicide. The mother of a student wounded in the Columbine High School massacre walked into a pawn shop on Friday, asked to see a handgun, loaded it, and then killed herself. Police said Carla Hochhalter, 48, shot herself in the head with a .38 cal handgun while a shop assistant was running a background check to authorize her purchase. Mrs. Hochhalter bought ammunition with her into the Alpha Pawn shop in Englewood, Colorado, and asked to see the gun, according to local police. When the assistant turned his back, she apparently loaded the weapon and fired twice, striking herself once and hitting the wall with the second bullet. She left a note, but its contents were withheld by authorities. Her 17-year-old daughter, Anne-Marie, was shot several times in the spinal cord, back, and chest in the April 20th shootings at the high school in Littleton, Colorado. Wow. Yeah, those are weird details. Nicholas Kunzelman and Stephanie Hart, Columbine students who were shot to death. This is the subway murders. In a subway 2 blocks from Columbine High on February 14th, 2000. No money had been taken from the register. Kunzelman and Hart, according to Donna Taylor, whose son was shot at Columbine and who's very active in the case, knew Harris and Klebold. Hart's interview is missing. Among the former employers of the subway was Rachel Scott. Greg Barnes, Columbine student who helped keep teacher Dave Sanders alive, allegedly hangs himself May 4th, 2000. His family and friends recalled he had been in good spirits and had expressed excitement about the basketball season next year. Ben Kuhn, Columbine student, allegedly hangs himself in 2001, date unknown. Jonathan Ladd, Columbine graduate, dies in a mid-air plane collision over North Denver, January 27, 2003. SWAT immediately takes control of the scene. Ladd was in the school on 4/20/99 and told news about a bomb threat that morning. Uh-oh. So I was going to completely write that off because mid-air plane collisions, although extremely rare, do happen. So, and it was several years later. This is January 27th, 2003. So it seems like genuinely unrelated. However, first issue, why would a SWAT team immediately take control of the scene? Okay, here's where it gets crazy. So Ladd was the one who told news that there was a bomb threat that morning. Now, we're about to go down even more rabbit holes. So, this is zdnet.com by Alan Boyle, April 27th, 1999. On the watch for web warning signs. The Colorado tragedy has sparked a new round of soul-searching over the net's dark side, and some net-savvy kids say they're feeling a backlash. This was posted April 27th, 1999. This is 7 days. 7 days after the shooting. The web warning signs of last week's Colorado school massacre slipped beneath the radar of parents and school administrators, online services, police, and outside watchdogs, but that radar is now working with a vengeance, and some net-savvy kids say they're feeling a backlash. More than a year before Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold went on their April 20th rampage at Littleton's Columbine High School, killing 12 students and a teacher as well as themselves, Harris posted detailed descriptions of the pipe bombs they were making on a website. When a teenage friend, Brooks Brown, saw those documents in March 1998, he thought the police should be notified. My parents talked to the bomb squad, Brown told NBC News. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Department filed a report on what it considered a suspicious incident, said spokesman Steve Davis. But nothing further was done. Columbine student Jonathan Ladd, meanwhile, said he also raised concerns about the school clique that Harris and Klebold joined, the Trenchcoat Mafia. Warning signs overlooked. 6 months ago, when Ladd took over as the student administrator for the school's website, he came upon material that group members, not including Harris and Klebold, posted while they were running the site. Ladd found a dark website with disturbing art, weird song lyrics, and, quote, probably message about different hate things, end quote, and said he reported it to the school's technology administrator. School officials told him to delete the data, but didn't seem worried about the content, he said. I just did what I was told and got rid of it, he told NBC News' George Lewis. School officials were not available Monday to comment. A couple of months ago, 2 researchers at the Simon Wiesenthal Center also spotted the Trenchcoat Mafia's web material. The Los Angeles-based center monitors more than 1,600 websites produced by hate groups. The fact that our researchers didn't choose to capture that website meant that there was nothing that explicitly or implicitly threatened anyone, said the center's associate dean, Rabbi Abraham Cooper. It was a page which they didn't really remember very much about at all, which just means it was just a couple of teenagers playing around. One of Harris's documents, posted on a website provided for America Online users, laid out homemade instructions for making pipe bombs. It even cautioned experimenters to handle gunpowder with care, since mom and dad might ask some questions. AOL's rules forbid posting bomb-making instructions, and although the service does not regularly monitor user home pages, action would have been taken if AOL were notified about such a site, said spokeswoman Kim McCreary. In the wake of the April 20th massacre, Harris's web pages and other pages that may relate to the investigation have been removed and are being analyzed by law enforcement agencies, McCreary said. And then there's just a whole bunch more general material there not having to do with Ladd. So I still can't find the exact report that Ladd... So he told News that there was a bomb threat that morning. So perhaps that was aired live on the news and then never aired again, because I don't know where people are getting information that Jonathan Ladd himself was the one who told that there was a bomb threat that particular morning. I mean, obviously there were other rumors, but I don't know if they've been nailed down. All right, moving on here. Erica Lee Lapine found dead, 24 years old, of undisclosed causes in prison on January 18, 2004. Lapine had been arrested in Appleton, Georgia in September 98 for planning to murder her mother. One of the male students she attempted to enlist in the plan was arrested along with a friend on April 19, 1999, for planning an attack on their high school? Okay, so this is in Georgia. They both wore black trench coats and were described by police as a carbon copy of the suspects in Colorado. There were early reports later revised that they had been communicating with Harris and or Klebold online or had been going to the same website. I'll be going down that rabbit hole in another podcast. Joseph Stair, a founding member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, allegedly strangled himself with an extension cord on September 14th, 2007. Days before the long-delayed dedication of the Columbine Memorial in Clement Park. There was blood on his face and on the floor. Stair graduated in 1998. He spoke openly of a hit list and plans to blow up the school. He continued to make frequent visits to the campus to see his friends even after being asked not to. There are witness statements that place him on campus that morning at the moment the shooting began, and a number of witnesses who heard the attackers address an accomplice named Joe. Russ Cook, Sheriff John Stone's successor at Jefferson County Sheriff in 2002, was found dead in his home November 2008. He had vowed to get to the bottom of the Columbine mess, and he was writing a book about Jefferson County politics. In 2002, before his electoral victory, he said, "I still don't know what the truth is with Columbine." Wow. And here's another response here. Several more strange deaths, not necessarily related. Brian Stone, Sheriff John Stone's son, 15, reportedly hung himself in April 1988. It's unknown whether he was a student at Columbine. Robert Mallon Craig, a graduate of Columbine and an associate of the Trenchcoat Mafia. He is alleged to have shot and killed his stepfather, a police officer, and then himself on April 29, 1997. Ron Latin, a student at Columbine High who allegedly hung himself several months before the attack, approximately January 1999. Matthew Depew, a graduate of Columbine, allegedly electrocuted while working on power lines June 15, 2013. Depew was locked in, may have been a witness to mysterious police actions inside the school, including possible elimination of other suspects. Depew's father was with the Denver PD and reportedly one of the first officers on the scene. According to Denver Post, June 19, 2013, the cause of Depew's death is still under investigation by the Eddy County Sheriff's Special Investigations Unit. Excel is also conducting its own investigation. The results of this investigation and why a power lines accident would be of interest to the SIU remains unknown. And Depew's witnessing of action comes from, again, we'll go to Tapatalk. This is a post by Mama for Paws, Jeremy and Brett, and the Trouble with SWAT. Wow, Star Viego. So this is from the York Daily Record, April 22nd, 1999. The class heard the sound of adult men, so they took a chance and opened the door. Quote, "Everyone put your hands on your head and run. If you don't, you will be shot," they said. And this is sophomore Jason Bear's story. He hid in the science hall with his class. So Jason led the class down the stairs and through a cafeteria. The comment here by Star Viego is, so after having to fear for their lives for the previous 2 or 3 hours, now the victims are subjected to death threats by the good guys. That's crazy that they said that. You will be shot. Wow. So here's a few issues with Matt Depew. This is from page 2825. Matthew stated a fellow student by the name of Jeremy Mullen came to the door and began pounding on it. Help, they're after me. They decided not to open the door and let him in because they were afraid of what was going on outside. Matthew stated he didn't know if Jeremy was taken hostage and was being used as a ploy to get them to open the door. Liet's on the phone with Depew for virtually the entire time. This is page 2840. At one point, one of the suspects pretended to be Jeremy and attempt to trick his way in. Ryan Deathridge, wow, that's a heck of a name, 2807. Ryan Deathridge said someone knocked on the door where they were hiding and said to them that he needed in because he needed a place to hide. Shannon Ryan, 42, page 4267. At one point, Ryan told me that a student named Jeremy Mullen tried to get in the room with them, but they would not open the door because they were afraid. James Stewart, 1183. Page 1183. While they were locked in the storeroom, a Jeremy Mullen knocked on the door to get in. Jeremy was with a Mike Kish, which is odd as Kish himself doesn't say he stayed behind with Mullen. Brandy Wiseman, page 4750. At about 12:20, 1 hour after they entered, they barricaded the room on the instructions of police. Jeremy Mullen came to the door at about 12:20 to 12:30 p.m. So let's keep in mind, according to the official narrative, by 12:08 p.m., Harris and Klebold had killed themselves. So at 12:02 p.m., they went back to the library. Between 3 and 6 minutes later, they walked to the bookshelves near a table. And by 12:08 p.m., they had killed themselves. So, back to the report here. This is Brandy Wiseman's testimony, 4750. At about 12:20, so this is after they're dead according to the official narrative, Jeremy Mullen came to the door between 12:20 and 12:30 p.m. He asked them to open the door and told them he was going to help them, but they did not open the door because they were afraid it might be the gunman. In a short time after Jeremy left, there were knocks at the door. She knew it was the gunman at the door. She said they could hear them reloading their shotguns and other guns in front of the door, and then began shooting at what she thought were appliances in the kitchen. She said that her watch was on and that this occurred at approximately 12:30. So this is 20 minutes after Eric and Dylan are already dead, according to the official narrative. So we, of course, have plenty more to go over. This is just the tip of the iceberg, of course. Nothing seems to add up in this case, and the Jeffcoat Sheriff's Office files have a lot of clues in them, and then there's so much that hasn't been even released yet. Whether it will or it won't, I mean, sometime in the 2020s, I believe they're set to release more records, but they probably won't release all of them, of course. And what is on the tapes that law enforcement doesn't want anyone to know? Now, there's, of course, speculation is they don't want copycats, etc., but there's already so much of the footage already online. So much has already been released. What would releasing some of their private thoughts? Is that because that goes against the narrative? Is it because they had assistance? Is it this some kind of MK Ultra issue? Or did they not want Eric and Dylan to be humanized in any way about their thoughts and feelings, whatever? Or, again, does it just simply run contrary to the narrative that was manufactured after the fact, that these two were just simply complete outcasts with no friends and nothing going for them, which was clearly not the case. So, hope you guys found another edition of Mindshock True Crime interesting. If you want to support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, or you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock. Like and share this podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon for the most in-depth logical analysis of cases, events, the paranormal, and anything and everything in between. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.